Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. We talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm Rose Jeffrey. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. The Nebraska Cornhuskers have finally landed a big transfer portal addition. Ahron Ulis, the former Iowa point guard, has decided to transfer to Nebraska. I'm going to go over whether I think that Ahron Ulis can help Nebraska be a better basketball team next year, and whether I think they can be a really competitive team in the Big Ten Conference overall. Now, Nebraska basketball, they have definitely been near the bottom of the Big Ten for the past few seasons. Fred Hoiberg, he has been tasked to try to rebuild Nebraska basketball, and Fred Hoiberg had a lot of success when he was the Iowa State head coach. He took the leap to the NBA, and he did not have success there, but Nebraska hired him in the hopes that he would be able to turn him around. But Ahron Ulis being able to transfer into Nebraska is a big addition for the Cornhuskers, because the Iowa Hawkeyes, they're a program that's definitely ahead of the Nebraska Cornhuskers. And Ahron Ulis was a guy that was improving for the Iowa Hawkeyes. He averaged 6.1 points per game, 1.6 rebounds, and 2.1 assists this past season in around 21 minutes per game. So he didn't play the full game. If you put his stats in a per 40-minute span, he probably would be averaging around 11, 12 points per game. So he's definitely a better player than his 6 points per game would indicate. And he is a 6'3", 190-pound guard. And Ahron Ulis is also the younger brother of Tyler Ulis, the former Kentucky standout at guard. So I think that overall the bloodline's there, and Ahron Ulis is much taller than his brother, so he has the potential to have success. And last season he shot 39.6% from the field, 31.9% from the three-point line, and 70.7% from the free throw line. The free throw number is not the greatest for a point guard. You would like that to be closer to 80%, and he only shot 32% from three. You would like that number to be higher as well, so maybe he'll shoot better being at Nebraska, where he'll possibly have more attempts from three, and he'll be able to take more shots, and he might be a starter for Nebraska next year, so he'll probably be a guy that might have more rhythm being in the game, versus when he was at Iowa, he didn't play the whole time, and it's very hard to get into rhythm as a shooter when you're not in the game the whole time. But still, with Ahron Ulis being next to all of those shooters like Keegan and Chris Murray over the past couple years for the Iowa Hawkeyes, you do think that would actually rub off on Ahron Ulis, and he might shoot a little bit better. But still, overall, do not let his statistics fool you. Ahron Ulis is still a big addition for Nebraska, because the Cornhuskers need help. And Fred Hoiberg, he is definitely bordering on the hot seat. He is a guy that is not in great shape right now. And I know that Nebraska basketball, they do have a lot of patience with coaches, but Tim Miles, their last head basketball coach, they fired him, and he made the NCAA tournament once or twice. And Nebraska ended up firing him. So Fred Hoiberg, he's never made the NCAA tournament. And yes, Nebraska, they did have their best season of college basketball under Fred Hoiberg's tenure this past season. They were around a 500 team, and they did have some success, but they did not make the NCAA tournament still, and that is exactly where Nebraska wants to go. That is where their fans want to go, especially with Nebraska football really struggling still, even though maybe bright things are coming up in the future for them. But Nebraska basketball needs to win, and Fred Hoiberg needs to win now if he wants to keep his job. And I think that Ahron Ulis could be a big addition for Nebraska basketball, because he is a guy that has Big Ten experience. He was a guy that was improving with the Iowa Hawkeyes, and he's an older player. He will be going to his fourth season of college basketball. He is a very experienced player, and they're going to need a lot of contribution from Ahron Ulis this next season, because Sam Griesel and Derek Walker, two really good players for Nebraska this past season, are gone. They're both out of eligibility. Sam Griesel obviously transferred in this past season for Nebraska, and he actually was kind of the de facto point guard for Nebraska this past season at 6'7". He was kind of the guy that ran the point, but he is gone. Derek Walker was a good post player, but he is gone as well. But Nebraska, they have not just brought in Ahron Ulis. They've also brought in Bryce Williams from Charlotte. He's transferring in, and he averaged 13 points per game this past season. And Rink Mass from Bradley, he's transferring in as well. He averaged 13 points per game also. So those two players will be solid additions for Nebraska basketball, because they were both guys that did average a decent amount of points at smaller schools. But I still feel like Ahron Ulis will be the biggest addition, because he is coming from the Power 5, and he's coming from the Big Ten. So he's already going to have that experience of playing against all the teams that Nebraska will be playing against next season. So I still think Ahron Ulis is a bigger addition, but Bryce Williams and Rink Mass are both solid transfer portal additions. There were some other Power 5 programs looking at, but they did land at Nebraska. So a good job by Fred Hoiberg to bring him in. And Sam Griesel had success coming from a small school as well for Nebraska this past season. So you never want to sleep on these smaller school transfers coming in. They can have a lot of success as well. I think all three players will be huge for Nebraska next year, but especially Ahron Ulis. But the big key for Nebraska basketball is Casey Tominaga. He's testing the NBA draft waters, but he's a fantastic basketball player. He averaged 14 points per game this past season for Nebraska. And before this past season, he was actually nowhere near as good. he did not shoot the basketball at as high of a level, and he did not average as many points per game as he did this past season. He averaged 14 points per game for Nebraska. If he comes back from the NBA draft, which there is a very good possibility of that happening because Casey Tominaga will more than likely not be a first-round draft pick, then Nebraska will have their best player back and 3 really solid transfer portal additions. So the foundation is there for Fred Hoiberg to have a team that can at least compete in the Big Ten. I don't know about making the NCAA tournament still, but Casey Tominaga has to return for Nebraska basketball. He shot 40% from the three-point line. His improvement was vital to Nebraska's success last year, and I think it's a good sign for Fred Hoiberg if Casey Tominaga continues to improve, because if he does and he shoots at an even higher level next year and he averages maybe even more points, Nebraska could be a better basketball team in this next season and beyond, and Casey Tominaga could go pro, which would be a great look for Fred Hoiberg and the Nebraska program, that they can get a guy that can develop and go pro. Not someone like Bryce McGowens, who they had a couple years ago that was a 5-star that came in because of his brother Trey McGowens and went pro. You always want those developmental players that you're able to get to the pros. That's always a great look. But if Casey Tominaga returns, that would be huge, along with the 3 transfer portal additions. But Nebraska, they also have Eli Rice, a power forward that's a 3-star recruit coming in. He's a solid player that I think will be a guy that could potentially have success in year 1 coming in for Nebraska, but he will be a guy that there will be an adjustment period, because when you're a 3-star recruit going into the rugged Big Ten, and it is tough to make that adjustment. We have seen players do it before, so maybe Eli Rice will be a good addition. Nebraska is also losing Coron McPherson, Oleg Kenjanets, and Denham Dawson all to the transfer portal. They are leaving the program, and none of those players really played too much. And Coron McPherson, he had some injury issues, but none of those guys played a big role for Nebraska. But Emmanuel Bandamel, he's a guy that could come back for Nebraska for an extra year of eligibility. He has not completely announced whether he's coming back, but he more than likely will, so he's a pretty solid player that averaged around 8 points per game for Nebraska this past season. CJ Wilcher, Wilhelm Breidenbach, Jawan Gary, Sam Hoiberg, Jamarquez Lawrence, and Blaze Keita are all players that are coming back for Nebraska. That's 12 spots filled. So in that case, Nebraska would have 1 more roster spot to fill if Casey Tominaga does return. If not, then Nebraska will have 2 roster spots available. But of all those players coming back for Nebraska, I feel like Jawan Gary's a guy that did transfer in from Alabama a couple years ago. He's a solid player for Nebraska that definitely could improve this next season. Emmanuel Bandamel is an experienced player that his return would be huge for Nebraska. And I feel like Wilhelm Breidenbach, he is a player that's had some injury issues, but if he's a guy that can stay healthy this next season, he was a former 4-star recruit. He could be a guy that makes a big leap this year. He has a lot of potential, and he showed it in flashes this past season. So if he can improve, that will be big for Nebraska as well. CJ Wilcher and some of the other players that Nebraska has could be solid this next season and really improve overall. But for the Nebraska roster, is it going to be enough with what Nebraska has coming back and coming in overall for the Cornhuskers to be competitive in the Big Ten this next season? I think the answer is yes and no. I think they will be competitive just like they were this past season, but I don't know if they have a team that's going to be able to make the NCAA tournament. Maybe the NIT, and who knows, if Nebraska can get some improvements from Wilhelm Breidenbach and some of the younger players on their roster that have had a lot of injuries. It's been very unfortunate for Nebraska that they've had a lot of injuries that have limited their growth, but if they can, I think that the potential is there for Nebraska to make the NCAA tournament next year, but I wouldn't bet on it. But if Casey Tominaga returns, that would be huge for Nebraska, because he will automatically be the best player on their team next year. And with Ahron Ulis coming in, he'll be able to pass the ball to him at a higher rate and be able to get the ball to Casey Tominaga off those ball screens. And I think that will be a great matchup, having Casey Tominaga and Ahron Ulis in the backcourt. But for Nebraska basketball, I think they have some good returning pieces in Wilhelm Breidenbach, CJ Wilcher, Emmanuel Bandamel, and Jawan Gary. I like Eli Rice as a recruit. I think he could be solid next year. And I really like the 2 transfers besides Ahron Ulis that Fred Hoiberg's brought in Bryce Williams, the Charlotte transfer, and Rink Master, the Bradley transfer. Both averaged 13 points per game this past season. I think they could be guys that maybe average around 8 to 9 points per game for Nebraska next year. That will definitely help the Cornhuskers compete in the Big Ten this next season. But Ahron Ulis, he's the big splashy transfer portal addition. He's not one of the biggest names in the portal, but he's the younger brother of Tyler Ulis. He had some success at Iowa, and he had his best season for the Hawkeyes this past year. If he is a guy that can come in and average around 10, 11 points per game for the Cornhuskers this next season, shoot around 35% from 3, maybe 75% at the free throw line, and pass the ball at a high level to Casey Tominaga if he does return, then I think Nebraska has a really good shot to be competitive in the Big Ten next season. But Fred Hoiberg did a really good job bringing in Ahron Ulis, and I think he will be by far Nebraska's best transfer portal addition for this next season of college basketball. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Comment down below what you think about Ahron Ulis transferring from Iowa to Nebraska, and whether you think Ahron Ulis will be able to help Nebraska be competitive in the Big Ten this next season, and whether you think Fred Hoiberg's doing a good job in the transfer portal overall for Nebraska. Follow me on Twitter as well. Link is in the description, and I will see you next time.